The United States has unveiled a host of measures aimed at rescinding Hong Kong's special status. The executive order signed by President Donald Trump essentially means that Hong Kong will now be treated in the same manner as China. The U.S. will be ending export license exemptions to producers in Hong Kong. This will make exporting goods from Hong Kong to the U.S. much more difficult. The high tariffs imposed on imports from China will also apply to goods from Hong Kong. The U.S. is also moving to block Hong Kong's position as a middleman between China and the U.S. Until now, Hong Kong used to import goods from China and then export to the U.S. in order to evade tariffs. This has now been banned. The extradition treaty between the U.S. and Hong Kong will be suspended. So will the student exchange program between the two sides. The U.S. will also halt training programs for Hong Kong security forces and end preferential treatment for Hong Kong passport holders. But the most important provision in Trump's executive order is the decision to reallocate refugee slots to Hong Kong residents. This paves the way for persecuted Hong Kong residents to obtain a safe haven in the U.S. China, on its part, has criticized American interference in Hong Kong. On Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry summoned the U.S. ambassador to China and registered protest over Washington's decision to impose sanctions and end Hong Kong's special treatment. For more details about this development, our correspondent Richard Kimber is joining us live from Hong Kong. Good afternoon to you, Richard. Take us through the significance of the decision to reallocate refugee slots to the persecuted Hong Kong residents and thereby allowing them a safe haven in the U.S.
Yes, this so-called Safe Harbour Act is certainly being praised and applauded by the pro-democracy activists here in Hong Kong, who are really hoping that the US will continue to pile more pressure on China while simultaneously offering an option for many pro-democracy campaigners here to seek a future elsewhere. There's been calls for this act to be pushed through the Senate as quickly and efficiently as the Hong Kong Autonomy Act was, which has just been passed this week. This one, though, might be slightly more complicated as it involves the relocation of many Hong Kongers, which, of course, many of the US acts so far have not necessarily involved at all. They've just been sanctions against China. And with the US's own domestic policy on immigration not necessarily the most welcoming in the world, it's not easy to understand whether this will pass through the Senate as quickly as some of the more tough economic and political sanctions have done when they've been pushed through the two houses into law and again by President Trump. So this one's not quite so clear, but certainly a lot of interest and support from the pro-democracy camp here, who are always looking for more pressure from the US and also hoping that there will be more options beyond the United Kingdom and Australia for places where they might conceivably have a future if they don't feel comfortable here anymore.
Right, and trade, a very big topic. The executive order signed by President Trump means now that Hong Kong will be treated in the same manner as China in terms of trade. Take us through this.
Well, that's certainly causing concerns among the business community here, because although some people have been saying for some time now that this US-China war won't really affect the day-to-day business operations in Hong Kong for the foreseeable future, there's now a real sense that it might. There's been some high-profile moves in the last 24 hours. The New York Times has announced that it's relocating a third of its office from Hong Kong and moving it to Seoul in South Korea because it says that Hong Kong is no longer a viable, safe journalistic hub in Asia, and it doesn't want to base all of its resources here. Also, just this morning, Deutsche Bank's CEO picked Singapore over Hong Kong as the location for him to establish his Asian base, which is the first time that a major financial company has made such a decision, but one that's expected to filter out across more financials as the next weeks and months continue. The latest American Chamber of Commerce survey here, though, suggesting that although many US businesses are increasingly concerned about the nature of this national security legislation, very few are actually being prepared to move or being prepared to leave or reallocate their staff elsewhere. So there's a bit of a standoff at the moment between people who are thinking that really it's time to move already and those that are taking a more cautious approach and wanting to see over the next weeks and months how this national security law really plays out, and specifically, even if it affects society here in Hong Kong in a very fundamental way, will it really affect big business? And their concern really, of course, is the dollar signs, and can they still operate in China despite this law in the way that they've been used to operating so far?
Richard, the extradition treaty between the US and Hong Kong will now be suspended as well. Hong Kong is truly being seen as one and the same as mainland China.
Yes, Hong Kong is increasingly becoming isolated now with regards to world extradition treaties. It's already lost its treaty effectively with Canada and Australia, and there's expectations that the European Union may also pull the plug on its extradition agreement with Hong Kong too. And there's a certain irony to this with regards to the protest movement, because back in 2019 the entire protest movement really kicked off because the Hong Kong government tried to push through an extradition bill of its own, which caused the protests in the first place because of concerns about people being extradited to mainland China. So we're really coming full circle now, but this time Hong Kong on the receiving end of extradition reneged from big powers such as Australia, Canada and now the United States. So it is increasingly becoming isolated, and this is a very sure sign that, as you've said, the US really is looking at Hong Kong now very much as part of China with absolutely no distinction. And that's the reason that both the pro-democracy activists are calling for more international pressure and the business community is calling for more support from its own headquarters outside of Hong Kong to understand if it's really a good idea to stay here at all.
Richard, thank you very much for that report.